So if you think about the patent system for a moment, have any of you had any experience with the intellectual property system formally, the patent system? Okay, if any of you have right hands, anyone who has a right hand, please put it up. Okay, okay, now those of you, put it down if you have. It's so hard to get anybody to volunteer their knowledge set. Okay, patents are a tool for selectively contributing to society what you know how to do, and if you're successful, receiving from a government the right to stop others from doing it. And then you have the choice how to handle that right to exclude, because a patent is not the right to do a thing, it's a right to exclude others. So if you think as an entrepreneur getting a patent is important, I'd remind you that patents cost money and they rarely bring money. I would remind you also they give you no right to practice what you've invented. And here's an example why an invention and an innovation are so fundamentally different and why you have to keep this in mind. Think of an innovation as a jigsaw puzzle. Some of you have children, though I look at the demographic and realize not very many, but all of you were children. If this is true, all of you played with jigsaw puzzles. Do the hand thing? Okay. So jigsaw puzzles work very well as a way of solving your fundamental boredom coefficient as a child. You can work on them for a long time. But there's 4 reasons that a jigsaw puzzle works. And the same 4 reasons drives how a product or service as an innovation works. A jigsaw puzzle first works because you can envision what you're putting together. This is really important. If you have a jigsaw puzzle, the most important thing, don't lose the box. If you lose the box, you have no idea what's in the bag of parts. Am I putting together the Sydney Opera House or the Eiffel Tower? What am I putting together? You must have the vision of what you wish to build. Critical in a jigsaw puzzle and in an innovation. You don't have to see the whole thing, but you must see what the whole thing would look like. The second part of it, you assume in the box are all the parts, or most of them, because sometimes the dog eats some of the parts. And you can still put it together knowing that this little piece is missing, that piece is missing, but you can put it together. So you assume that a jigsaw puzzle is comprehensive. Now with a product, you assume that ultimately you can assemble the necessary technologies, manufacturing competence, regulatory compliance, marketing tools to put it all together. They're all there somewhere. Another is that you have to start a jigsaw puzzle, as we all do, with the edges and the corners. We all start with the flat, straight bits on the edge, and those of us really wise build the corners first. Okay? You have to start with a nucleation point in a product or service like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to have something to build from. And finally, and this is surprising, a jigsaw puzzle is standardized. That is, the pieces fit together because there's only a small number of ways to fit them together. If you have an infinite number of shapes, you will never put a jigsaw puzzle together, but there's really 6 shapes, 5, 6, 7 shapes, and it's just a matter of finding how they work. Standardization of how these pieces fit together. Some of these pieces will be intellectual property, but the most important feature of intellectual property I've discovered is not yours or mine, it's everybody else's. Because when the patent system was developed in its modern form 200 years ago, I'll give you a little story about that, there was an invention by a man named Eli Whitney. He developed a box that, by turning a handle, could separate the cotton fibers that make for your clothing from the seeds that were stuck within it. It was called a cotton gin, or cotton engine. And it separated it, and it was a breakthrough in industrialization of making cotton, this box. And he went to the first patent commissioner of the United States of America back in the very early 1800s. That happened to be Thomas Jefferson, my great-granduncle, many times removed, who was a pretty smart guy. And he had to go there and convince Thomas Jefferson that his box was new, that it was not obvious, that it required a real inventive step, and that it was useful. Well, I mean, he demonstrated it for Thomas Jefferson, and yeah, it separated the cotton and the seeds. It was definitely useful because people weren't doing that before. And he'd never heard of it before, and he's a pretty smart guy. So he got a patent on that. And that patent, in principle, was designed to allow Eli Whitney to form the Eli Whitney Cotton Gin Company and make lots of money and cotton gins and revolutionize industrial cotton production. But what if, when Eli made that, he'd used a gear on the shaft, just a gear. And he'd used a particular kind of cam to lift it and whatnot. Now he goes and sets up the Eli Whitney Cotton Gin Company to revolutionize agriculture. And he starts making these, and he gets a knock on the door, and it's not a customer. It's a lawyer. Oh God, your worst nightmare. A lawyer has come to your door saying, you may not produce that because my client has a patent on that gear. What? And then another knock, and another lawyer. This is a disease. This one has a patent on the camshaft you're using. And then this one has a patent on the material you're using for your boxes. And this one has a patent over the overall process of manufacturing this thing. Well, that didn't happen then, but it does happen now all the time. 200 years ago, when the patent system was conceived, an invention, the thing, was basically an innovation. It was a product. Now, there's almost not a single product made that doesn't require bringing together dozens, hundreds, or thousands of pieces of technology, regulatory compliance, and other expertise. You have to assemble a very and increasingly complex jigsaw puzzle. Now, here's where we're going to come join it up with social enterprise. If it's really hard to see the pieces, let alone the assembled puzzle, if it's hard to make them fit together, then it's going to be expensive. You're going to need clergy, lawyers of your own. You're going to need business intelligence expertise. You're going to need information about global markets, about regulatory compliance, and most importantly, intellectual property, because it's other people's, not yours. No matter how smart you are, 98% of your product is somebody else's idea. Okay? Now, if it's expensive to put it together, what's the price point of that jigsaw puzzle that's acceptable? It's pretty high. So you're going to have to charge a lot of money for these jigsaw puzzles because it's so expensive to put it together. Now, let's join that with social enterprise, this concept of doing good for the world, doing something a little bit about we. Well, first of all, most people that are disadvantaged don't have a lot of money, so they don't exercise a strong market signal. They don't have a lot of liquidity, but they're smart, they're context knowledgeable. Even poor farmers are often the wisest people we would ever know, and certainly committed. So what's the issue here? If they don't have a lot of money, if they don't have a lot of market signal, they're not going to be able to articulate what this jigsaw puzzle will be like. They're not going to be able to put it together because they can't afford the clergy. They can't afford the knowledge. They can't afford making the pieces go together. So why is it any surprise? We have pharmaceuticals for erectile dysfunction and baldness, but we don't have anything for malaria. Why is it that we actually have fantastic food processing industries, but really poor grain storage facilities? Because it's expensive to innovate. Therefore, cost-effective innovation is neglected. So, thinking again, where can we as entrepreneurs have an impact? And where can we even use technology, which is one of the main features of this discussion? How do we make it cheaper to innovate? How do we make it cheaper? It turns out that most of the expensive innovation is in removing risk or limiting risk. So how do we limit the risk, the avoidable risk, what Donald Rumsfeld would have called the known unknowns? It turns out that most of the avoidance of risk can be done with better information. If you actually know what the shape is going to be looking like, and if collectively you can have people bring together pieces that fit together in your jigsaw puzzle, you've dramatically decreased the risks and the costs. If you can start with other people's nucleation points, the corners, if someone else contributes a corner, someone else contributes an edge, you can get further along in the chain and you can drop the price point. So we can start talking about developing innovations that have massive social impact, massive environmental impact, extraordinary innovations, not by us controlling it, by us contributing to the process, by us enabling innovation by others. So I'm going to spend the last 2 or 3 minutes describing what my institution has done in that way. We set out initially as biotechnologists inventing the tools for genetic engineering. Then, of course, discovering that it wasn't about academics or nonprofits dorking around with genes that was going to change the world. It was going to be the private sector's willingness to implement that into products. And that was being owned by large multinationals who were buying up the intellectual property and enjoying the fact that it was actually opaque. That whole world of genetics in agriculture, or for that in medicine, opaque. They benefit from that because they can afford They can afford to put their jigsaw puzzle together. And if it's an expensive puzzle, they don't care, they charge more. Because you don't have any choice. You gotta eat, you gotta survive. So we set out about 15 years ago to realize that generating transparency in the map of innovation was going to have a bigger impact in stimulating small enterprise, in stimulating relationships between private and public sector, and very importantly, improving the quality of the public sector's intervention in life. The public sector is, in my view, one of the greatest unfocused resources we have. We talk about it like universities or national laboratories globally are really achieving something for the public good, but you know, they have no metrics for that. The metrics, they have no way of knowing if what they do increases the public good, except when they chase money and they chase attribution. Can we make it possible for public sector to know better whether it's right to contribute the edges and the corners, whether it's right to give better vision on the picture of the jigsaw puzzle, whether it's right to ram the pieces together, or whether it's right to celebrate one piece and maximize revenue from that piece? Imagine a jigsaw puzzle with 100 pieces, because we can imagine that easier than 1,000. Imagine you've assembled 98 of them. Now, what happens when somebody owns the last 2 pieces? They've got you over a barrel. So what happens? They say, I will be successful by getting as much money as possible for my piece. Now, most entrepreneurs would say, this is called an exit strategy. Fantastic. I can sell out. They'll make a ton of money. Well, they'll give me a ton of money, and they'll make a ton plus. And therefore, everybody's successful, except the price point of the innovation. It's going to be high. What happens if that piece, you don't celebrate for the piece, but you celebrate for the puzzle? That's what social entrepreneurism is about. So friends of mine who are developing institutions that change trash collection, that change global civic health, that change agricultural productivity, or solar electrifying villages, they're changing it by looking at the shape, cost, and ownership of the puzzle and what they can do to contribute to its creation. So I'm going to show you what we've done. If you've got Chrome up here, thanks Jack, over the last decade towards that.